So in these times, more than ever, we were all searching for ways to rebuild trust with the public. As we all know, that's easier said than done. But no one would dispute that part of the solution lies in understanding and connecting with communities in meaningful ways, right? There's a connection that can be made, but I think meaningful is the important word there. Some public media stations across the country have been doing that through innovative ways. They've been experimenting for years with content and civic engagement projects, and it seems to be paying off. And that's what we're going to be talking about here today. So joining me on the stage is Rich Homberg. He is the president and CEO of Detroit PBS. He's been there since 2008. It is an organization that today includes the statewide Michigan Learning Channel, the 20-station Great Lakes Now Initiative, Classical Jazz, WRCJ, and PBS Books. It's a pleasure to have you here. Amy Shaw is the president and CEO at 9 PBS. Amy took on that role in February of 2020 after serving the organization in various leadership roles beginning in 2003. She is the first woman to lead 9 in its 70-year history. She is recognized as a national leader and innovator in community engagement and public media. A pleasure to have you here as well. And then finally, Courtney Pledger has been executive director and CEO at Arkansas PBS. She has always had a bold vision for the network that led to its transformation as a multi-platform storyteller for both local and national audiences. She also brought about exponential growth in K-5 educational content and services. And great to have you here.
Thank you.
Okay, so I talked about the appetizer and then the main course and the dessert. So we start off with the appetizer. So you have about a minute. It can be a minute-ish, but when all of you will get a chance to do this, right? So when you think about innovation, I'd like you to reflect on when did you start trying something new? What was it that motivated that action? And were you starting from scratch, or did you borrow or maybe steal a little bit from someone or something here or there? Okay, so we'll start with you, Rich.
Well, it's ironic that you asked the question because Amy and St. Louis was part of what we did in Detroit. So I got to the station in 2008. Long story, very disconnected from the community. We had left the city. We bought a building outside the city. Again, long story, lots to tell there. But I also was recognizing it was coming out of the crisis. What do we do? What's the next generation of this? Connected with the Indianapolis leader, Lloyd Wright, connected with St. Louis, Jack Almish, and we brought together the 3 stations for 2 days of brainstorming. We brought in a facilitator. Where do we go next? And we built the original model that I showed you earlier called the Urban Agenda. It was a very difficult couple of days. And at one point, I told the rest of our leadership team that they would join us at 4 o'clock for a meeting. We worked all day long. At one point, around 3:30, the facilitator turns to me and says, "We're not ready to bring your staff in," because it was hand-to-hand combat. She turned to Jack, and Jack says, "That's what Rich promised the station." And in a half hour, we spent 1.5 hour trying to consolidate all the thinking we'd done into what became this model. Our staff came in, watched what we did, listened to as literally Amy and Georgianne Herbert walked them through it, and they said, "We can't believe how much you were in alignment." It was wonderful. But it was that moment of who can help, how can we help each other, connected with some great stations, and we've been building off of the same model ever since then.
Great, and we look forward to hearing a little bit more about all the things that you've been doing. Amy, for you.
Yeah, and that model, actually, that was a formative moment for all of us, and I don't know, the idea of innovation, I bristle at that a little bit.
Why?
Because
Why
it sounds kind of buzzwordy, and it's like, oh, we're so innovative. I think innovation is really about solving problems. We were part of something in 2007 that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting invested in called the Community Engagement Initiative, which was a moment. And I remember when we first got involved in it, I knew it was going to change the trajectory of our station and our organization. And it was sort of like finding the language that you didn't know you needed to learn, and finding a way to do something that I knew we had to do. And so it was innovative, and it was about listening to your community, but it was so simple. But where the innovation really turned into something practical was when there was a real need. And so I think the idea of finding a need or seeing a need, I don't think you have to find them, they're all around. Seeing the need was the critical piece that I think changed it from being abstract to being concrete. And so innovation, I think, is really about solving problems and seeing the needs in our community. And I think as PBS stations, we are so perfectly positioned at this moment. And I know lots of people, it's a crisis right now, but it's our moment. And I think you talked about regaining trust. For us, I don't think we ever lost the trust in St. Louis. I can't speak for anybody else. I think you guys are extraordinary, but we've kept it. And I think every move has not been about being safe, but it's been about being in relationship with our community, which I think by default has been innovative, which is remarkable to me because it's just so ABCs. It's very baseline.
Right. And I do want to come back to this issue of being safe, because some people like to live in the safe zone. We'll do that in just a second, but Courtney?
Right. I came in 2017, and as Rich said, station was very disconnected from the community, and we're different that we're a state-wide broadcaster. We're a state licensee, so 40% of our funding, at least, comes from the state legislature. So the challenge really was how do you connect people statewide? How do you pull people in? How do you remind them what public media has to offer, and come up with programming and engagement that will pull people in, raise its hand above the crowd, and bring people in to engage with us. And I feel like we've had a good run at that.
I want to return now to this issue of safety. A lot of organizations, they like to do what's very familiar to them, what they've always done, because anytime you try something different, that's risk, right? And anytime you have risk, there's a problem that, the possibility that you might fail. How did you, in those moments, did you ever have any doubt that this is the direction we need to go in, or maybe we shouldn't go so quickly, or maybe we should spend a little more time than how we just threw this together? Like, how do you deal with that in that moment when risk could potentially lead to failure?
Well, we're going to fail a lot. That's not the point. I mean, you got to be used to failure. You have a million meetings, you consider a million ideas, but finding a way to turn to our community and our partners, whether it's media partners, the universities are more open than ever around partnerships, and then various communities within Detroit. Detroit is a face-to-face town. Detroit's a town that says, do you understand me? Do you know who I am? Do you know how I got here? Systematically going out into our communities and saying, where do you need us? And how can you help inform us? And being worth their time. We have a Black Churches group. We have an AAPI group. Everything we built in partnership with the community. And yeah, you're going to go out, and some things won't turn into magnificent programs or sustainable efforts, but oftentimes you're a click away from understanding the issue well enough to be able to take it on. And as the world changes in what is literally one of the most diverse cities, while simultaneously one of the most segregated cities in the country, as the world changes, to already know members of the community and to be able to reach out and say, help us understand. And that has become sort of the hallmark. Everything starts with getting face-to-face in Detroit, and a great benefit. But yeah, you'll waste some time, but it's okay.
Amy, Courtney, any hesitation, any sort of, let me make sure that this is what we should do? Because
really.
There's risk.
I mean, I think it was pretty clear. We had to move on to all the platforms successfully that where the audience was moving, which the station at that time was not. We had to build relevance, and when you're building relevance, you have to figure out what it is that's going to pique people's interest. And really, I did a strategic plan within the first 3 months of coming into the organization. And then one thing really lit our fire. I had people learning to produce digital content and shorter content, and a lot of them were not wanting to change, and some were saying, why are we doing this? I don't understand this. Where are we putting this? And then COVID hit, and we partnered with a department, we called them and said, what can we do? And we ended up producing a pretty intricate school on the air virtually with Teachers of the Year spread all over the state. And the team was shaking in their boots. You know, it's like, can't do this, can't do this. So yes, you can. You're more ready than you are, and they were. And so from that moment on, they looked at each new thing as, what can we do? How can we change things? How can we feel the relevance that we felt during that time?
It's always amazing how sometimes in life these moments that are so big, catastrophic, can actually lead to some progress. Anything else you wanted to add on this?
Just, not that this room is this way, but our team is very like the front row people. They were the kids in school who like raised their hands first. No disrespect meant to you back row people, but so I think that's hard for people because nobody wants to fail. I think what's also hard for us and what I experienced was when I took over as CEO, we were really financially challenged. And I think it's hard to be risky and it's hard to be bold when you know what you're doing could potentially tank the organization, and the difference between making payroll and not making payroll is pretty close. And so I think it's really that idea of innovations. I think you can't just be innovative to be innovative. It has to be in search of a solution or a problem that you're trying to solve. And having the financial, a little cushion helps you be even more like, hey, let's try this. And that's been our experience over the last 5 years. Our team has been much less risk averse because they know that they have the financial backing, and because we've been talking about the why so clearly. And if the why is about supporting our community, which that's a pretty wide chasm that you can drive through, but being very specific about the problem that we're trying to solve helps that, as opposed to we want to be a hero or we want to gain more audience or we want to make more money. It's we have a problem to solve and nobody else can do this but us. What's our only? That's really been a big piece for us, which helps us be more bold and helps us make better decisions about what we need to take on.
And as you try to get to the why, is that something that goes from the top down, or are you engaging everyone in the organization to help you to better define the why?
I think it's it's got to be everybody. And one of our little phrases, we have a lot of little phrases at 9PBS. One is we're like a really big deal. And part of that is I just needed people to understand that we played really big. And we knew that we were good and we knew that we could play even bigger. But people had such a sense of humility that it was problematic and holding us back. And even with our board, to understand we were here, but actually we could get to here. And right now I think we're here and I think we can still get way up here. But that idea of we're a big deal played into this. And I think getting people on board. So when everybody in the organization is like, wait a minute, I'm a really big deal. I'm helping make this place a big deal. People lean in a little harder. And if people think that it's my job, they're going to sit back and wait for me to come up with a decision. And so I think our approach is really collaborative. We just had a senior team retreat last week. And I really looked around the room and thought, like, this is our strongest team yet. Like, if we're going to be in a crisis, this is exactly the team to have at this moment, because they're all leaned in. I like to say that we each have our superpowers, whether you're the DC or the Marvel. It's not my world. I don't know it. But this idea that each person brings something so magical. So I don't have to, there's only one Rich. I don't have to be a Rich, right? So there is really only one Rich. But we don't have to duplicate efforts. We each bring what we bring and we can riff off each other. But I need each person to bring their best. And the other phrase that we have right now is let the young ones lead, because they're super hungry and they want to be involved and they want to be essential and influential in this particular crisis. So I think it's really everywhere. But I think the idea of where they're going directionally is set in some sense of collaboration, but finally the board and we have to decide. This is really the direction. If not, it becomes too scattered. So
there's this theory in advertising that says if you own the category, drive the category. There's one and only one PBS station that serves virtually every city in America. So let's take a city like Grand Rapids, a wonderful, nice station. I've known Jim's predecessors for a couple of them. The university owns it. Grand Rapids travels as a tribe. If you're at the table, you're expected to be at the table in Grand Rapids to be part of the success of Grand Rapids. Along comes, and owned by Grand Valley State University, along comes the general manager that says, can I pull up a chair to this table? He's now among the leadership community in Grand Rapids. Nobody else is going to show up to take Jim's job away. He's walking in saying, I reach probably half of the DMA, you probably touch on a regular basis. I have 60 platforms. I have an enormous membership base. I can help, right? That is monumental if you look at it that way. Or you could run a nice little public television station inside of a university and go home early. He doesn't want to do that. But the potential that we hold in every city in the country, look at the map. There's nobody else that's going to show up in Boston the way GBH is going to, or the way GBU is. We have such an incredible opportunity around where we can play.
Well, that's great. So for those of you keeping track, that was the appetizer. Now we're headed off to the main course. And Courtney, we will begin with you. I want to hear more about live high school sports, and then if you can delve a little deeper into the docuseries Southern Storytellers as well, ways that you've been able to try something different and find new audiences.
Sure. Well, sports is kind of a no-brainer in Arkansas. They live and breathe sports. So looking for the gaps, as the team did, what are we missing in this statewide community? What are the things that no one can or will do except us? So sports was kind of one of the first thoughts. We managed to bring in the Arkansas Activities Association, partner with them, and get it put together. But by that time, as Amy was saying, people were, let's not just do sports. Let's do ESPN. We can be the ESPN of Arkansas. And I'm not saying we're ESPN of Arkansas, but we are pretty close. So it's an opportunity to really showcase all these student athletes, and it brings everybody together. Everybody together at that moment, grandmothers and parents and students and everybody, and then they go back and they watch it again on demand. We also distinguished it by, we can't use media breaks, obviously, so we created short documentaries that really went around the state and told the stories of all these small communities against the backdrop of sports. So those kind of things really have pulled in people that I don't think had ever really thought once or twice about PBS in the state. And that was an interest that pulled them in. And you'll see it in our numbers, in that every time there's a sports thing, we get a massive spike. And this March, basketball, we had a 180% increase in digital engagement around basketball. So it's clearly loved, and with the state legislature, it's also been a really great talking point and defense of us being
Why
here.
you matter.
Yeah.
Did you talked about partnerships, but what else did you have to bring into your space in order to make this work? And were you innovating I'm sorry, I'm using the word again, but did you have to innovate along the way, or did you come out with a pretty fully baked plan and executed it perfectly?
Well, by that time, we had recruited a really amazing production team, and they were just chomping at the bit to take this on. And there were some little blips in it along the way. It took a little bit for them to solidify around it, but it was pretty well formed from early days, and they love it. There were people on our staff that were maybe not as engaged as some others, and they found their thing, in the sports broadcast, and just love it. Can't wait for each new sport to come up.
And just one other quick thing about that. Did you find that this was, in addition to seeing those spikes, were you seeing this as an entryway into some of the other things that you do?
So you bring the audience in, and then how do you keep them? How do you, so during all the games, and they're seeing everything else that we do, and through the in-person engagement at all the games, same thing. I mean, we used every single opportunity we could come up with to pull people to and introduce them to, everything that we do. You like this? Maybe you'll like this.
Right. Amy, I'd love to hear about your big idea or ideas. I know community engagement guidebook, that was something. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the Community Engagement Guidebook really is a journey. So again, CPB funds the Community Engagement Initiative. We were one of 12 stations. This is 2007 to 2009. We learned a lot, and I think what made it really come together was it went from being abstract to being very concrete. And so in 2008, there's the global financial crisis, and the community really relied upon us to help connect people to trusted resources, because trust was really the key word there. People had been preyed upon by nefarious lenders. It's still happening today, but it was, it spurred this global financial crisis. And the narrative was, well, it's really your problem because you got a bad mortgage. What the narrative was not was, if your house is in trouble, my house is in trouble, which quickly people started to realize when things started to fall apart. But we because of who we partnered with in St. Louis, we learned all those lessons pretty early. And so we jumped into action working with 25 trusted community partners who all knew each other, but were all too busy to work together. So we gathered them around the table. We created, again, pretty rapid prototyping of a whole thing. And I can say with great certainty that we helped save people's homes to this day and helped create a different narrative around the financial crisis in St. Louis. And then we did that work with communities across the country. What then came out of that was really documenting all the experiences that we had. We'd done a couple of national initiatives since then, and so we wrote it all down and really wanted to have kind of your handy-dandy guide to, if you're a public media organization, what are the best ways for you to engage your community, which runs the gamut from the foundational, which is, one, to serve a community, you have to have great affection for the community you serve. You cannot be separate from, you must be part and parcel to, which is why I think public media is so well suited, because we are local and we are there, we are physically there. People see us in the community. No matter how large your community is, you're still, or small, you're still visible. The second piece of that is sort of the how-tos, so how to connect with trusted partners, how to build those relationships, who are your besties, who are just there because they think they're going to get on TV, how to turn them into your besties, and how to align around common goals, how to develop those common goals, and then how do you work with the community in a very service-driven way, community conversations, how do you really understand what the community wants? Because it's not you and them, it's us. And so how do we come together with the community to understand aspirations, hopes, challenges, both from people who are doing the work, and I think the key thing is the people who are impacted by the work, which is oftentimes those voiceless folks who are most impacted by a set of issues and people are doing things to them. So that's really the Community Engagement Guidebook. We are right now, it's a weighty tome, I'm gonna be honest. And we are now working with PBS to actually redo that guidebook into a much more digital-facing asset. This was obviously when we did the guidebook in 2017. It was digital, but it was still, a lot of things have changed since
And is
then.
this for ease of access?
Ease of access, but just, the world has changed, how you produce content has changed.
So updated.
Yeah, so it's an updated version. So that's the guidebook. And it's served us really, really well. And part of that, the key thing with that is the community engagement model, which is an outgrowth of what we did with Rich and Indianapolis in, 2011. So we really cemented this community engagement model, which is widely used across the country. But we're actually iterating on it right now because the visual needs some updating based on how communities operate and also the current set of conditions in terms of being so polarized. So we're reworking that. I mean, the idea is the same, the concept is the same, but how to adapt. So I think part of this is, I always think of our work kind of as improvisational dance, which I'm not a dancer at all. But how do we constantly update the work? And I think it goes back to your first question, which is like, it's easier to be safe. If you want to be a pass-through public media organization, it's just a lot easier, frankly. It would be so much easier to just sit back and take the programming and be like, no, we're good, and do a pledge drive. This is about really rolling up your sleeves and being in in the mess, which is uncomfortable, it's unknown, people will love what you do, people will hate what you do, and how do you really hold up a mirror to the community to do something different and so that it's a stronger community. So this idea, this morning someone talked about bringing our community together. That's a huge piece of our future, bringing people together, which is both an act, and not only an act, but an ongoing act and an outcome. Like, we have the ability to bridge divides and bring people together, both physically and in the digital space. It's a pretty exciting time for that. Everybody that I see, and even my best friend texted today, like, how are you doing? Everybody's like, how are you doing? It's a really hectic time, it is. And it's our moment. It really is our moment.
I think you had told me earlier, May is our moment.
May is our moment.
Yeah.
May is our moment. Like, if we just look at this time as trying to get through it, I think we will have wasted something. I think public media has a moment to really show people how we're essential and to be in a very important place, because what we do now, people are going to remember that, and how we act and how we show up and how we've been showing up is what people are reminding us of in our community, and I know that's happening in hundreds of communities across the country.
So we are in that difficult moment. Right.
Thank you.
And we talked about it was COVID, the financial crisis, and the other thing is you're moving very quickly. Is that the advantage that you have? You look at what is happening around you, but you also have to move. You can't pause or
Yeah.
Well, but keep in mind, PBS creates opportunities for us that are enormous, that come to our direction. America 250, from Gates's Great Migrations to Burns's documentary, it sets the stage, it opens a door that we can play off of. And the other piece is minimum viable product, right? Shots on goal. We find when we're talking to organizations about a partnership, let's find one thing we can do together. Because we know we can boil the ocean, we can dream about this, but there's an important anniversary coming up for your community. How do we celebrate it? And what you find is, you find champions. If you think about what organizations are interested in civic dialogue, and you start to look around, you want to play on Tuesday? Well, we're too busy. Okay, thanks. You want to play on Tuesday? And we're looking for champions, we're looking for partners, but oftentimes it's let's try one thing. With America 250, we reached out to the Michigan Central, the train station, said we think there's an opportunity here. We did 6 days of events at Michigan Central capturing people's stories. They were magnificent partners. Not every museum is as easy to work with. So you find who are the partners that you can work with, and what's the the first move or the minimum viable product, and inevitably you find somebody. It's like, oh my God, call them. They're great partners, and that's what we want to be seen as.
What are some other things that you've done over the last several years to engage your audiences in a deeper way?
The power, you have to be legit about this, the power of an advisory group. We formed an AAPI advisory committee in 2020 as we're headed into a major documentary about the Asian American community. That then turned into an opportunity to celebrate a legendary documentary the station produced, Who Killed Vincent Chin, and we just got a grant to do some multi-city work with the Asian American community. Wants to be understood. They want to be at the table. They want this to be a dialogue. That was just a spectacular opportunity. It's sort of typical of how we approach things. We have an ongoing, and if you're a former altar boy, any former altar boys in the audience would get a kick out of this. We built a Black churches group. We bring together a group of ministers every month for a conversation, and it is wonderful. And they, along the way, they say, so you were an altar boy, Rich. When you were a kid, the only time you went to see the priest is when your parents were getting divorced. People come to us when they don't like their mailman, right? And so, but it's become this group that we can take a difficult. What do you do about absenteeism? What do you do about housing costs? What do you do about law enforcement challenges? To bring them into the conversation and then have them endorse us. We had Gates for his gospel documentary. We created an event. We had 1,800 people RSVP in about 48 hours for an event at the Fellowship Chapel.
And is this turning into content as well, or is it more of a gathering?
Oh, inevitably it turns into content because it turns into opportunities. On Tuesday, we're doing this. Can you get a crew there? But again, that started with Henry Louis Gates, but it goes further back than that. But it started with national content, localized, form a relationship, and go on from there. And what we're hoping for is to build a relationship where that moment comes along and say, we need to bring somebody, call Detroit PBS, they're ready. And so it's very enriching as well to gather these communities and have them advise us.
In the startup world, whenever you hear innovation and, we came up with something new, you also hear about all the things that didn't work, and that most things that you try don't work. So if we can reflect now on some of the things that you wanted to do, so you were in that innovative spirit and then you said, we're not going to do that, or let's try this and it failed, what would that be?
The second time this week I've answered this question on a panel.
I did not know that, by the way, so
no, that's
I'm
okay.
not cheating.
I don't know if it's, I think when I was the number 2 person in the organization, I was much more of a canary in a coal mine. And as the number 1 person in the organization, I am so asset-based and so positive. I think the list is long of things that we could have done differently and we could have done better. And I think your point about doing things quickly, I think we're not moving fast enough. I think we are not embracing the digital tools. The panel that was in here before with Rainey, it was so fascinating with Deb Roy talking about the things that they're doing with the talk, act, listen. It's like we're doing that, but we're not using enough of the digital tools. So I think we're not remembering enough that we don't have to do this by ourselves. And we're partnering with everything that we do. Every organization that we work with, like we have big partner networks. But I think sometimes we feel like we have to come to the table with it figured out. And I think that's where we're failing. And so I think that's a shift towards our future. And I think the crisis is helping accelerate that quite a bit so that people are a little scared about what's happening in the world, in their own communities, in their own lives. But within public media in particular, it's a very concerning time. So we could sit still and not do anything, or we can do what the community needs us to do the most. So we have to accelerate. So I think where we're failing, where we have failed, is when we try to get it too perfect. We try to be in charge of it. We don't let enough people in on it. And I think that goes again to like the front seaters. Like we want to get it right. I will say can I talk about the things we've done well?
Continue
Okay,
on, and then
all
we'll
right.
come. But I also want to hit Rich and Courtney on this. But yes, if you can, go ahead.
Diversifying our board. I think our board, that really has been the pivotal piece to being financially secure, really ensuring that we represent our community. Because as much as we were authentic in partnering with organizations and being in so many different places in the community, if the leadership of your organization doesn't represent that, and when I took over as the CEO, I had been the only woman on the leadership team, and it had been all white men. And love a white man, married to a white man, but that's just not who our community is. Mm-hmm. And so making that shift, I think sometimes you make those shifts and then the snowball starts to happen in the best way possible.
Courtney, did anything come to mind?
I'll say that, kids and family and education is at the center of what we do for Arkansas. And so the team really wanted to do a kids show. And they were into experimentation, really getting into trying different things. And so I really just gave them this, just go do it. They created a show called Blueberries Clubhouse, which was, a really sweet show and clever. It had so many clever things about it. We didn't get any curriculum fed into it in any sort of a productive way, and we didn't hit the right target audience and all of that. So we're looking at it from those standpoints. It was a failure, but it was a success on some other levels. Then that prepared us to do Mystery League, which we did, which became a really just a one big community engagement effort where it was shot all over Arkansas. The fictional town was made up of this courthouse and that park and that elementary school and all of these different things. And you know, we feel, you know, on a level for us, it was a huge, huge success, and we wouldn't have been able to do it if we hadn't done Blueberry's Clubhouse.
You turned that into an opportunity.
And then Mystery League, you know, got picked up for PBS Kids, so watch it on the app. But you can't always get it right the first time.
Very good. Final word before we get to the
Soapbox
dessert.
time, and this is for the whole room. We have not taken a big enough stand and we're not being recognized in a big enough way around press forward and the role we can play in journalism in our communities. We are still seen as the public television station that's hard to penetrate. Do you have standing in journalism? I was in a meeting once where a startup journalism organization said, we all know PBS, 60-year-old white suburban women. We over-index in diverse communities, and we are an organization that delights in bringing the entire community into it. We have to recognize our potential, but we also have to recognize the gap in how we get that potential on the table and drive it. Same situation existed around education. We talked about establishing a seat at the table, and the Learning Channel's done that. But I think our potential, we are the last man standing in virtually every city in the country. Nonprofit, major media organization that reaches enormous numbers of people on enormous numbers of platforms, and has, in our case, 67,000 members, and yet we're not always at the center of the journalism discussion. We should be there. And I think that's something we have to take on as a station by station, but as a system.
Very good. So we're going to be taking some questions here in just a second, but the dessert, so get ready if you'd like to start walking up here or getting your question formed. Here's the dessert, so it has to be quick, right? So Rich, we'll start with you. I read somewhere that you said Detroit is the most important city in America.
Come on. TMI CIA. I love you. Ms. Goldberg. You want to understand this country, you can't go to Boston. You can't go to San Francisco. You can't go to LA. You can't go to...
Okay.
You want to, but just over the last 125 years.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
You want to understand where this country's been over the last... Come to Detroit.
All roads go through Detroit.
One of the most diverse, most segregated cities in the country, an iconic city, a city with a strong voice. Come to Detroit. We'll help you understand America. It's the most important city in America.
So that was correct when I was doing my research.
Relentlessly.
Okay. Amy, this one isn't funny, but you spent a month in China.
I did.
You were studying Chinese media and also just how some of the complexities of society there. What was your one takeaway?
They are exactly like us. It was remarkable. I was on an Eisenhower Fellowship, and I got there, and you think the Chinese media are going to be so different. And I was at China Central Television, which was, they're pretty buttoned up. And immediately I said, what are your top 3 challenges? And they're exactly the challenges that we have. Like, so much clutter. And this is 2015, so those challenges have only gotten more pronounced. Clutter, 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 all the different platforms. Dwindling dollars, all the same things that public media and media in general face. And I was fascinated with just how China in general, they don't have NGOs really, because the government always took care of that, but now the government's like, we're good. Mm-hmm. So communities are having to figure out how to solve their own problems, and they're looking, as always, just like their Supreme Court, they're looking to the United States, and they're looking to schools like Washington University in St. Louis, their School of Social Work, on how to solve those problems. And so, I think we're much more alike, and I think we're playing into a false narrative to think that we're so very, very different. And I think it's careening towards something that's catastrophic, frankly.
Okay, thank you for that. And finally, Courtney, she's sitting there. Oh no, what
is
did he
my
find?
dessert?
Right. Your dessert is you were also involved in international films and TV. What international film project stands out to you, your favorite that you were connected to in some way?
Well, let's see. I'll talk about the most recent one. I had an animated film based on Michael Morpurgo's book, Kensuke's Kingdom, that only took 20 years to get made. So I started it. Woo, Sarah understands that. I started it when I was working in London and partnered with a British producing partner. We started it I've had a couple lifetimes since that time, and it finally did see the light of day. Nominated for a BAFTA, has won quite a few other awards, and it's just a really thoughtful, beautiful 2D animated film that I think was well worth everybody's time.
Okay, thank you. Hope you enjoyed the lunch that we just served up. Now we'd love to hear from you. If you have a question, one question? I have another question if you're not going to ask a question. If you're just going to look at me while I look at you. Oh, we have a question over here. If you can give us your name, please.
Dan. I'm Jim Schachter from New Hampshire Public Radio. Can any of you tell a story about how you have incentivized or inspired a spirit of innovation in your organizations?
Go ahead, Courtney.
When I came into Arkansas PBS, everything was compartmentalized. We do half hours, we do this, we do that. And what dawned on me in the early days was you've got to free them of these bonds, and just say, it doesn't, just create. So those early days, they were asking, as I said earlier, what is this for? And I said, it doesn't matter. Just do what you feel like doing. Here's a topic that's interesting, go do it. And I felt like that was the seed, ultimately looking back on it, that really powered our team, is the freedom to do that.
Any other thoughts on inspiring, motivating?
Yeah, I think it's, for us, it's sort of safety. Our people wanted to know that they were safe before they wanted to go really far forward quickly. So don't cancel anything just yet. And the COVID pandemic, everything was on the table. And I think keeping everybody's job safe in the COVID pandemic gave the sense of trust and security. Because our board and a lot of other public media organizations were like, we should probably lay off like right now because we're broke. And I said to the board, please don't do that because it'll take us 10 years to get back to any semblance of where we are now. And the community really needs us to show up at this point, and we're going to be sending exactly the wrong message. So doing that then helped us. Then when I came to, like, hey, I'd like you to go to London, and I'd like you to do this content thing. The Cubs and Cardinals were in London in 2022, three. They were supposed to do it in the pandemic, they didn't. And we sent a crew there, not because we wanted them to go to London, but it was the analog of what happened in East London to what was happening in West St. Louis around the new soccer stadium, and which gave us so much credibility with all kinds of entities in St. Louis. So I knew we had to do that, but people were like, yeah, I don't really want to do that. Which as a young producer, I would have gone to London in a heartbeat and shot that. But
of course.
The point of that story is keeping people safe and then doing some crazy things. And then sometimes you just got to do those things. And then of course it won Emmy Awards. People loved it and everybody felt great about it. And now people are like, what do we do that's amazing? So, yeah.
We do a couple things. One, I asked about COP reports later, I can explain, but every Monday at 11:30, we do what's called the Standing Monday meeting. I don't run it, which is really good news. It lasts 1/2 hour, starts on time and ends on time. I get the last 3 minutes, and the idea is last week, this week, next week, celebrate wins, opportunities, how do you bring the entire organization together? There is an expectation that every staff member is there. It's fun, it's upbeat, there's a cadence to it, and I need that story told on Monday is like a very common phrase inside of our building. So how do you bring the entire community together?
Very good. Well, thank you very much. I thought this was a very positive, uplifting conversation in these times, and I think more people need to hear about how I like to describe it as you need to keep your legs and your feet moving, even when clouds are heavy, even when resources are thin. The way you move forward is you keep moving and trying new things, and yes, use that word, innovating. So thank you very much, Rich, Amy, Courtney. This was a wonderful conversation.